The Canoe Fight Creek War 1813. 3 men in a tiny canoe faced 9 heavily armed warriors on the raging Alabama River. The year is 1813, and the next few moments will determine not just their fate, but the course of the bloody Creek War itself. The odds seem impossible, yet what transpires next will become one of the most extraordinary battles in American frontier history. Welcome to Native Legends and History. Stories like and subscribe to uncover forgotten tales that shaped America, and hit the notification bell to never miss an episode of raw courage and untold heroism. The Alabama River region in November 1813 stood at a tipping point. The settlers, reeling from one of the war's darkest chapters, the Fort Mims massacre barely 2 months earlier, were finally beginning to push back against their Creek adversaries. That August day had seen over 500 soldiers, women and children brutally slaughtered, a tragedy that would forever haunt the territory. But now the tide was slowly turning. Before the famous Canoe Fight, blood had already stained these lands as settlers ventured from their fortified sanctuaries, desperately trying to harvest their crops, while Creek warriors watched from the shadows. In these tense October days, a series of brutal skirmishes set the stage for the legendary river battle. 3 white settlers, alongside a skilled black navigator named Caesar, would soon face 9 Creek warriors in a death-defying struggle on the open water. But first, we must understand the violence that preceded this extraordinary encounter. The story begins with the Bashy Skirmish, a deadly engagement that showcased the Creek warriors' lethal expertise in guerrilla warfare. Colonel William McGrew, leading a contingent of 25 mounted men, had ventured up the river into the Bluff neighborhood. Their mission was to investigate Indian raids on the abandoned plantations that dotted the landscape, homesteads left vulnerable in the chaos of war. As McGrew's party approached a modest stream called Bashy, which merged with the Tombigbee River, just north of Woods Bluff, they rode straight into a masterfully laid trap. The Creek warriors, masters of forest warfare, had chosen their ambush point with deadly precision. The first sign of the impending attack came in a deceptively simple form: a turkey tail raised above a fallen log, a silent signal that would unleash devastation. In the next heartbeat, the morning exploded into chaos. Creek marksmen, perfectly concealed in their positions, opened fire with devastating accuracy. Colonel McGrew, a veteran of the Burnt Corn engagement, was the first to fall tumbling lifeless from his saddle. Edmund Miles followed him into death. Moments later, Jesse Griffin's body jerked violently as enemy fire found its mark, his wounds severe but not immediately fatal. McGrew's men returned fire, their shots echoing through the trees, but they were shooting at shadows. The Creek warriors had positioned themselves perfectly, using the natural cover to deadly advantage. The mounted settlers, exposed on their horses, found themselves in an impossible position. As they retreated in disarray, 3 men were unaccounted for. Edmund Miles, already confirmed dead, and the Griffin twins, Jesse and David. These brothers, identical in appearance and inseparable in life, few could have predicted how their story would unfold, or how their actions would ripple through the events to come. The morning of the ambush, Jesse Griffin was gripped by an inexplicable sense of danger. He turned to his twin David in their quarters and made a pact that would prove fateful. They would stand together no matter what came, as they had entered the world together. If death found them this day, they would face it side by side. The twins loaded their weapons with extra care, that morning, each checking the other's equipment, as they had done countless times before. When Creek warriors opened fire from their hidden positions, Jesse took a bullet through his thigh. The shot shattered both muscle and bone, sending him crashing to the ground as McGrew's men scattered for cover. Through the chaos of gunfire and shouts, David heard his brother's cry. Without hesitation, he turned his horse back, dismounted under heavy fire, and dragged Jesse behind a fallen oak tree. While others fled to safety, the twins transformed their desperate position into a defensive stronghold. Jesse, propped against the log, despite his wounded leg, handled the reloading of both weapons. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency. Even as blood soaked through his clothing, David maintained a steady stream of fire. On approaching warriors, his aim deadly, accurate as he picked off any creek, brave, bold enough to break cover. When David's ammunition ran low, Jesse would take over the shooting while his brother reloaded. Through this coordinated effort, they reportedly killed 7 Creek warriors, their precise shooting making each bullet count, as their ammunition steadily dwindled. The twins communicated without words, reading each other's movements instinctively. When Creek warriors attempted to flank their position from the west, Jesse spotted the movement and shifted his fire without David having to say a word. When warriors tried rushing their position during reloading, David met them with devastating accuracy. For nearly an hour, they held their ground against waves of attacks. Through the gun smoke and chaos, retreating soldiers caught their final glimpse of David. Despite a broken limb sustained in the fight, his right leg shattered by a Creek bullet, he remained upright, braced against a tree trunk. His movements were deliberate and controlled as he reloaded his weapon, eyes scanning the tree line for threats. Even as enemy fire intensified around their position, Jesse lay beside him, still feeding ammunition despite his grave wound. When General Claiborne's forces searched the battlefield days later, they found a scene that told of fierce resistance. Spent cartridges littered the ground around the fallen oak. 7 Creek warriors lay dead within 50 yards of the twins' position. David's gun lay broken, the breech separated from its barrel, likely from a direct hit. But his body was nowhere to be found. Tracks and signs in the blood-soaked earth suggested intense, close-quarter fighting in the final moments. His son William, then an infant at Woods Bluff, would grow up hearing various accounts from survivors. But one fact remained constant. His father's body vanished without trace from a battlefield that bore testament to his extraordinary last stand. Colonel McGrew's horse appeared alone at St. Stephen's the next morning, having traveled 30 miles from the ambush site. Blood stained its saddle and flanks, and one pistol holster hung empty, silent evidence of its rider's fate. Search parties under Claiborne's command recovered and buried the bodies of Colonel McGrew, Edmund Miles, and Jesse Griffin. They were laid to rest with full military honors 5 miles east of Woods Bluff, near what would become the Linden and Coffeyville Road. Jesse's wounds told of his determination. Despite the initial shot to his thigh, he had sustained 2 more bullets before the end, yet never abandoned his position. General Claiborne launched an immediate response to the ambush, crossing from St. Stephen's with a substantial force to conduct operations throughout the Woods Bluff and Bashy region. His men encountered heavy resistance at every turn. Creek warriors employed the same guerrilla tactics that had proved so effective at Bashy Creek, striking from concealed positions before melting away into the dense forest. Captain William Bradbury, a veteran of the Burnt Corn battle, known for his aggressive pursuit of Creek war parties, took fatal wounds 2 miles above the Louis Mitchell Place, along the old Coffeyville and Woods Bluff River Road. 3 of his men died trying to drag him to safety. The violence escalated through September and October 1813. Creek war parties, emboldened by their success at Bashy Creek, intensified their raids on isolated settlements and forts. They struck with precision, targeting supply lines and outlying farms. Claiborne's forces established a temporary base at Jackson below St. Stephen's on the river's east side in the Pine Level area. From this position, they attempted to protect settler communities while awaiting General Flournoy's authorization to advance deeper into Creek territory. The waiting proved costly. Each day brought new reports of burned homesteads and settler casualties. Farms that had stood for generations were abandoned overnight, their owners fleeing to the relative safety of fortified positions. Along the river, the Bashy Creek ambush and the Griffin twins' last stand marked a turning point in the conflict. Creek warriors had demonstrated their mastery of forest warfare, while the settlers showed they would fight to the death to defend their homes. The stage was set for even bloodier confrontations as both sides committed fully to what was becoming a war of extermination. The supply mission departed Fort Madison at dawn. Two wagons led by Jim Dale and Malachi Sharbo, accompanied by a detachment of soldiers heading 1 mile north to gather corn for the garrison. In their wake, Beard, still recovering from illness at Micaiah Benji's residence, borrowed a horse and set out toward Benji's farm. Armed with a saber and holster pistols, he planned a quick trip to collect potatoes and collards. Near the fort's gate, he passed a soldier returning for additional cartridges, his ammunition box nearly empty. Benji's farm lay precisely 0.5 miles north of the fort, a 2-acre plot perched on a ridge. 3 massive pine trees had once dominated the southwest corner until Benji felled them. Their massive trunks now stretched parallel down the western slope, branches tangled together. The main road, originally running along the western fence, now curved left to avoid these fallen giants before rejoining its original path, near the northwest corner. 5 Creek warriors had transformed these fallen pines into a perfect hide when the supply wagons passed. The large soldier escort deterred them. They remained motionless, watching the convoy disappear around the bend. Minutes later, Beard approached alone along the old road section, riding between their position and the fence. Beard dismounted at the northwest corner, secured his horse to the fence posts, and climbed over. He left his pistols in their holsters, keeping only his saber as he began cutting collards. The soldier he'd met earlier, cartridge box now replenished, hurried back along the road toward the wagons. At 200 yards from the patch, the soldier froze. 2 Creek warriors exploded from the pine branches, vaulting the fence with war cries piercing the morning air. Beard dropped his harvest and sprinted for the eastern fence warriors, closing the gap with every stride. He cleared the fence and raced along its length to the southeast corner, veering onto a hog trail that led toward the main road where the soldier stood. The soldier raised his musket, but couldn't fire. Beard and his pursuers formed a single line, making any shot too risky. As Beard reached a bend in the trail, surrounded by post oak saplings, the warriors opened fire. He fell instantly. The Creek warriors crushed his skull with lightwood clubs, took his scalp and sword, then vanished eastward at full sprint. The remaining 3 warriors emerged from their pine tree cover, crossed the potato patch at speed, and disappeared in the same direction as their companions. Luther Bradbury's company, hearing the shots, wheeled toward the scene at full gallop. David Glass arrived first, finding Beard's mutilated body on the trail. The supply wagons and their escort, also alerted by the gunfire, rushed back but arrived too late. Beard's horse, spooked by the war cries, had broken free and already galloped back to the fort. Beard, age 35, originally from Illinois or Missouri, was carried back to Fort Madison and buried within its walls. The soldier watched helplessly from his position, 200 yards away, the dense post oak thicket, obscuring his view of the killing ground. By the time he adjusted his position for a clear shot, the Creek warriors had vanished into the forest. Through gaps in the foliage, he glimpsed 3 more warriors emerge from their hideout in the fallen pines, sprinting across the potato patch to join their companions. Lieutenant Bradbury's patrol, barely outside Fort Madison's gates when the shots rang out, wheeled their horses and thundered toward the scene. David Glass pushed his mount hardest, arriving first to find Beard's body on the bloodstained trail. The supply wagons and their escort charged back, moments later having heard the same gunfire. After collecting the soldiers' detailed account, Bradbury led his troops east in pursuit of the Creek warriors. Despite an extensive search, they found no trace of the raiders, who had melted into familiar territory. The patrol returned only with Beard's corpse, loading it onto a wagon for transport back to Fort Madison, where they interred him within the fort's walls. His riderless horse, having broken free at the first war cry, had already made its way back to safety. The death of Beard, a 35-year-old settler who had ventured from Missouri to the Mississippi Territory, added urgency to Fort Madison's reconnaissance efforts. Patrols of soldiers and citizens regularly ventured out, some seeking intelligence on Creek movements, others drawn by the dangerous allure of frontier warfare. In early November, the most ambitious of these expeditions departed Fort Madison under Tandy Walker, a former government blacksmith from St. Stephen's. His three-man party included George Foster, renowned for his tracking skills, and Evans, a fearless quadroon hunter. They crossed the Alabama River and pushed deep into contested territory, advancing to James Cornell's destroyed homestead. At Burnt Corn Spring, Evans dismounted at the outskirts, leaving his horse with his companions. Moving silently through the undergrowth, he spotted a solitary Creek warrior digging potatoes in a nearby field. Evans took careful aim, fired a single shot, then advanced to claim his victim's scalp. A thorough search of the area revealed an abandoned Creek camp on the field's far side, its occupants scattered by Evans's gunshot. Gathering what supplies they could carry, the three scouts rode hard for the Alabama River. At Sizemore's abandoned settlement, they discovered a field of corn approaching harvest and grass suitable for grazing. Despite numerous fresh moccasin prints and other signs of Creek activity in the area, exhaustion and their horses' needs compelled them to make camp. They advanced a short distance into the field, lit a small fire against the November chill, and settled in for the night. During the dark hours, Foster jolted awake, shaken by what he described as a prophetic dream. He urgently roused Walker and Evans, insisting they abandon their position immediately. The vision had filled him with an overwhelming sense of imminent danger from nearby Creek warriors. Walker and Evans dismissed Foster's urgent warning with casual waves of their hands, settling back onto their makeshift beds beside the dying embers. Foster, his instinct screaming danger, moved deeper into the field where the cornstalk stood 7 feet tall. He found a depression in the ground, amidst the high grass 100 yards from his companions, and positioned himself where he could observe both the tree line and his friend's campsite. At first light, the attack came with devastating precision. 5 or 6 muzzle flashes illuminated the pre-dawn shadows as Creek warriors opened fire from multiple positions. Foster watched in horror as Evans's body jerked violently from the impact of multiple rounds. The initial volley was followed immediately by the thunder of feet as warriors armed with knives rushed the campsite from 3 directions. Foster took advantage of the chaos to slip into the cane brake, pushing through the dense vegetation that stood twice his height. Behind him, he heard the sounds of pursuit and combat fade as he forced his way through the thick growth for over 2 miles. At the river, he plunged into the cold water, letting the current carry him downstream, away from any searching party, before swimming across to safety. He reached Fort Madison exhausted but unharmed. 2 days of tense waiting followed at the fort. Then at midday, sentries spotted a figure stumbling through the trees. It was Tandy Walker, barely conscious and grievously wounded. 3 bullets had shattered his right arm, rendering it useless. Another shot had struck with such force that it dented the butcher knife in his belt, leaving his entire left side a mass of dark bruising. His clothes were stiff with dried blood, and 48 hours of exposure had left him feverish. Once treated by the fort's surgeon, Walker provided a detailed account of the ambush. The Creek warriors had positioned themselves in a semicircle around the camp during the night, waiting for the exact moment when darkness began yielding to dawn. Their first volley killed Evans instantly. Walker, despite being hit multiple times, managed to leap to his feet. His years as a government blacksmith had given him tremendous strength and stamina, which he now used to sprint through the 8-foot-high corn stalks and dense grass. The Creek warriors pursued him in groups of 2 and 3, but Walker's renowned speed, he had once outrun a mounted patrol over a quarter-mile distance, allowed him to stay ahead of them. He reached the cane brake 400 yards ahead of his closest pursuers. There he crawled deep into the vegetation, using years of frontier experience to cover his tracks. For over 6 hours, Walker remained motionless as Creek search parties methodically combed the area. Multiple times, they passed within arm's reach of his position. He could hear their discussions in Cree and English as they tried to track his path. The search intensified when they found drops of his blood on broken cane stalks. Finally, a distinctive signal blast on a powder charger echoed through the cane brake. 3 short bursts followed by a long one, calling off the search parties. Walker waited an additional 4 hours after the last sounds of searching ceased. Darkness brought new challenges. His wounds had stiffened, fever set in, and he had lost significant blood. At the river's edge he spent 2 hours, gathering and lashing together enough cane stalks to support his weight. With only his left arm functioning, he clung to the makeshift raft and used his legs to propel himself across the Alabama River's swift current. The journey to Fort Madison became an ordeal of endurance. Walker crawled when he could no longer walk, navigating by the stars through familiar territory that now seemed alien in his fevered state. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his shattered arm. He would later recall stopping more than 20 times when unconsciousness threatened to overwhelm him. The final mile to the fort took him over 3 hours to cover. The official report recorded the date as November 5, 1813. The incident highlighted the increasingly brutal nature of the frontier conflict. Creek warriors had perfected the tactics of ambush and pursuit, combining traditional woodland skills with captured firearms and an intimate knowledge of the territory. They could strike without warning, inflict maximum casualties, and vanish before retaliation arrived. Their raids targeted not just military patrols, but also isolated homesteads where they took scalps, prisoners, and any useful supplies before disappearing into the vast wilderness. Yet, history had demonstrated that in direct confrontations, determined settlers could match and overcome the Creek warriors' considerable fighting prowess. One of the most famous examples had occurred generations earlier on the Atlantic coast when Captain Miles Standish and 3 Plymouth comrades confronted for powerful Indian chiefs, Peaksett and 2 others, who had orchestrated a complex conspiracy to obliterate Weston's colony before launching a larger assault on the Plymouth settlement. Standish employed sophisticated counterintelligence tactics, infiltrating the Indian camp under the guise of routine trade. He patiently cultivated relationships while gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. That moment arrived when all 4 conspirators gathered in a single cabin, believing themselves safe among what they thought were unsuspecting victims. Standish and his men secured the door from inside, deliberately trapping themselves in close quarters with the chiefs. The friendly Indian Habermas stood as witness when the confined space exploded into savage, hand-to-hand combat. No war cries or shouts disturbed the violent encounter, only the impact of traded blows, the crash of bodies against walls, and the labored breathing of men locked in a desperate struggle for survival. The brutal combat in the confined cabin reached its savage conclusion. Each Plymouth fighter overcame his opponent through superior combat skill and determination. Captain Standish himself squared off against the massive Peaksett, a warrior who had previously mocked the captain's small stature, boasting of his own strength and courage. Despite the physical mismatch, Standish's military experience proved decisive as he brought down his formidable opponent. Within moments, all 4 Indian chiefs lay dead, while their Plymouth opponents stood victorious. This confined battle of 4 against 4 would find its parallel in an even more dramatic confrontation on the Alabama River, though here the odds would prove far more lopsided, with 3 settlers facing 9 Creek warriors in a fight that would test the limits of human courage. The setup for this legendary encounter began in November 1813 as hostile Creek war parties intensified their raids on Alabama River settlements, foraging for supplies and striking vulnerable targets. Captain Dale, determined to push the raiders east of the river, secured permission from Colonel Carson at Fort Madison to mount an offensive operation. Dale assembled a substantial force, 30 Mississippi volunteers under Lieutenant Montgomery, combined with 40 Clark County militia led by Lieutenant G.W. Creek. The expedition departed Fort Madison with Dale and his lieutenants at the helm. Their first day's march northward through abandoned plantations proved uneventful on day 2. They shifted southeast toward the river, where they used canoes to cross at French's Landing, known locally as braziers. They made camp on the bank, their men suffering through a cold night in inadequate clothing. At sunrise they resumed their advance. Jeremiah Austell, son of Captain Evan Austell, managed the 2 canoes with 6 men assisting him, keeping pace with Dale's main force as they moved along the eastern bank. The first sign of contact came when they spotted a canoe loaded with Creek warriors descending the river. Upon discovery, the warriors quickly paddled to the dense cane brake at Randall's Creek's mouth, disappearing from view. A separate group of warriors encountered Dale's men on the bank, but retreated under fire. The exchange left one warrior dead and several wounded. The difficult terrain along the eastern bank forced Dale to order a crossing. Back to the western side, however, 12 men including Dale Smith, Austell Krieg, Elliot and Brady remained behind, preparing a late breakfast and roasting sweet potatoes in a small clearing. Their meal was interrupted by shouts of alarm from the western bank. Abandoning their food, they rushed to the river bank with weapons ready. A large war canoe appeared, carrying a chief and 10 painted warriors. While Creek forces on the eastern bank held their position, 2 warriors from the canoe leaped out towards shore. Smith's accurate shot dropped one, while the other escaped eastward. The remaining 9 warriors in their war canoe continued downstream, presenting an imposing sight. Dale had only a small canoe on the eastern shore, manned by a black navigator named Caesar. He ordered the larger canoe to be brought over, but when 8 men attempted to execute this command, the menacing presence of the 9 warriors in their approaching vessel gave them pause. The 8 men retreated to the western shore, leaving Dale furious at their hesitation. In a moment of audacious courage, he proposed attacking the larger canoe with only their small dugout. The tiny craft could barely hold 4 men, Caesar at the paddle and 3 fighters. Without hesitation, Dale stepped into the unstable vessel, followed by Smith and Austin, who took position in the precarious prow. The size difference between the vessels was staggering. The settlers' dugout barely kept them above water, while the Creek warriors' war canoe could accommodate 11 or more men. Every movement risked capsizing their craft, while the Creek warriors stood stable in their larger vessel. The 9 warriors maintained their positions, weapons ready, watching the smaller craft approach. At Dale's command, Caesar's powerful strokes drove their dugout straight toward the war canoe. The 3 Americans raised their weapons for an opening volley, but disaster struck. Only 1 gun fired its shot, having little effect. The other 2 weapons priming had been dampened by river spray. They were now committed to close quarters combat with virtually no firepower. The date was November 12th, a pivotal moment in the Alabama frontier conflict. On the western bank, 61 American observers watched in tension. On the eastern shore, 9 more held their breath. Unknown numbers of Creek warriors, Judge Meek would later estimate 300, concealed themselves in the dense cane brakes along both shores. None could intervene in the impending clash. The final approach became a moment of excruciating suspense. All still just 19 years old, stood in the prow watching for the first sign of attack. The Creek chief broke the tension, shouting in English now for it, "Big Sam." As the dugout's prow touched the larger canoe, the chief's rifle swung down like a club, crashing into Austell's skull. Somehow, the young frontiersman survived the devastating blow. Dale and Smith exploded into action. They lunged forward, wielding their rifles as clubs, striking the chief with coordinated blows that sent him crumpling into his own vessel. His challenge proved to be his final words. Caesar, displaying extraordinary skill, maneuvered the canoes together and held them steady through the chaotic struggle that followed. The battle transformed into a brutal, close-quarters melee. Austell, recovering from the chief's strike with remarkable resilience, rejoined the fight. A Creek warrior's warclaw caught him, knocking him down again, but Dale's intervention saved him once more. Austell snatched a war club from his attacker's grasp and used it to hurl the warrior into the river. Smith engaged multiple opponents simultaneously, his rifle but crushing bone with each swing. Dale moved through the larger canoe like a whirlwind of destruction, his superior strength and combat experience proving decisive. The Creek warriors fought with equal ferocity, but the confined space of their canoe now worked against them, preventing them from bringing their superior numbers to bear effectively. The combat ended as suddenly as it began. 8 Creek warriors lay dead in their vessel, their bodies soon committed to the Alabama's flowing waters. A 9th warrior struck by Austell's captured war club. had already disappeared into the current. The three Americans stood triumphant in the blood-spattered war canoe, their smaller craft still lashed alongside, with Caesar maintaining his steady grip on both vessels throughout the entire engagement. The individual contributions of Dale, Smith, and Austin became impossible to separate in the chaos of combat, but their collective victory against overwhelming odds would enter frontier legend. Through a combination of desperation, skill, and sheer audacity, 3 frontier fighters and 1 skilled navigator had overcome 9 experienced Creek warriors in their own element. Like the legendary trio of ancient Rome, Horatius, Lartius, and Herminius, who defended the bridge against overwhelming odds, the 3 American frontiersmen carved their names into history through shared courage and martial prowess. Their physical attributes and fighting capabilities proved decisive in the close-quarters combat of the canoe battle. Samuel Dale, the eldest at 41 years of age, cut an imposing figure. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighing a solid 190 pounds, his frame showed the results of years of frontier life. His muscular build carried no excess weight, honed by constant activity and the demands of wilderness survival. Dale's physical presence matched his natural leadership abilities, making him an intimidating opponent in close combat. James Smith, at 25 years old, represented the prime of frontier manhood. Though shorter than Dale at 5 feet 8 inches, his 165-pound frame was perfectly proportioned. His stocky, powerful build, combined with natural agility, made him especially dangerous in the confined space of the canoe battle. His Georgia upbringing and pioneer experience in the river region had prepared him well for the demands of frontier warfare. Jeremiah Austell, remarkably mature for his 19 years, stood an impressive 6 feet 2/4 inches tall. His 175-pound frame featured whipcord without muscles, an ounce of surplus flesh. The sinewy build characteristic of young frontiersmen allowed him to maintain both strength and agility. During extended combat, his youth brought vitality, while his frontier upbringing provided the necessary combat skills. These fighters possessed the same physical advantages that had served ancient heroes and medieval knights. But as trained through practical labor rather than formal exercise, their muscles were hardened by the daily tasks of frontier life, clearing land, building fortifications, and constant travel through difficult terrain. A group of 40 or 50 such men, unleashed on the deck of a British warship under commanders like John Paul Jones or Commodore Perry, would have been a nearly unstoppable force. After the battle, they used the captured war canoe to ferry their 9 companions across from the eastern bank. The entire party proceeded upriver to Cornell's Ferry, searching for additional Creek warriors, before returning to Fort Madison that night. Of the original 11 warriors first spotted in the canoe, only 1 had escaped the Americans' deadly efficiency. The aftermath of the battle took these men in different directions. James Smith, though his role in the canoe fight was crucial, left the least historical footprint. Born in Georgia, he embodied the brave and daring spirit of frontier settlers. After making his mark in the river region, he relocated to East Mississippi, where he eventually died, his full story largely untold. Samuel Dale's life, by contrast, is extensively documented. Born in Virginia in 1772, his path to frontier legend began in 1784 when his family moved to Georgia, settling near Creek territory. Early hardship forged his character when both parents died, leaving him responsible for 7 younger siblings. He adapted by becoming an Indian trader, then a guide for settler families moving to the river territories. Dale's military prowess translated into political influence. In 1816, he helped shape the territory's future as a convention member. By 1817, he served in the Alabama Territorial Assembly, representing Monroe County, which then extended west of the Alabama River to the watershed. His reputation led to appointment on the 1824 committee welcoming General Lafayette to Alabama's capital. The state legislature recognized his contributions by granting him the rank of brigadier general. His expertise in frontier relations resulted in his 1830 appointment as a federal commissioner overseeing Choctaw removal. Moving to Mississippi in 1831, he remained active in public service, representing Lauderdale County in 1836. Dale's remarkable life journey ended at Daleville, Mississippi in May 1841, leaving behind a legacy that helped shape the American frontier. Dale often attributed his survival through countless dangers to an unwavering faith in divine providence. But among the legendary figures of the Creek War, Jeremiah Austell, later known as Major Austell, carved out his own remarkable path through American frontier history. Born in South Carolina in 1794, Austell's early years provided unique preparation for his future role. He spent his formative years among the Cherokee people, absorbing their customs, trading practices, and warrior traditions. At age 18, he and his family relocated to the Mississippi Territory, where he would soon make his mark in the Creek War. After distinguishing himself in the conflict, Austell transitioned into civilian life with characteristic adaptability. He secured a position as clerk at St. Stephen's, working in the mercantile establishment of his uncle, Colonel David Files, who served as quartermaster of the Army. Following his uncle's death in 1820, Austell stepped into public service as deputy marshal. His career continued to flourish in Mobile, where he served as both clerk of the court and city warden. His natural leadership and administrative abilities led to his election as representative in the state legislature. In 1820, for drawing on his extensive experience in trade and administration, Austell established himself as a commission merchant. The enterprise prospered for 13 years, until the devastating financial crash of 1837. At its peak, his business served 400 customers. But the economic collapse left him with staggering losses of $170,000. Austell had based his business practices on principles learned during his years among the Cherokees, expecting the same level of honor and straightforward dealing he had experienced in Indian trade. The harsh reality of white settlers' different business ethics proved a costly lesson. In 1840, Austell purchased the Tombigbee River Plantation near Fort Kearny. By 1844, he established his permanent residence in the pine-covered uplands 2 miles from the river. The choice of location near Fort Kearny held special significance.